The fastest way to make an avoidant chase is to stop being emotionally reachable. Avoidants are regulated by distance. Closeness doesn't calm them, space does. So when emotional access becomes inconsistent, something inside them switches on. Not panic, not longing, awareness. When warmth is no longer freely available, not withdrawn completely, just no longer guaranteed, their nervous system reads it as loss of control. And control is how avoidants stay safe. You stop filling the silence. You stop checking in first. You stop explaining what you feel and why you feel it. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, almost invisible way. And that's what unsettles them most. Because avoidants aren't used to emotional mystery coming from someone who once felt predictable. They're used to being the distant one. When the roles reverse, their internal balance breaks. You reply slower, not to punish, but because you're no longer waiting. You share less, not to hide, but because you stop offering vulnerability without reciprocity. You don't explain your moods because you're no longer managing their comfort. They feel the shift immediately, but they can't name it. There's no argument to point to, no boundary to push against, no emotional outburst to dismiss, just absence where access used to be. And uncertainty is the one emotional state avoidance were never taught how to regulate. They were taught how to detach, how to rationalize, how to suppress, but ambiguity forces reflection, and reflection feels like exposure. So they lean in, not because they suddenly understand their feelings, not because they're ready for intimacy, but because distance now belongs to you. This tactic works because it recreates the emotional environment they're wired for. Closeness that feels conditional, connection that feels fragile, attachment that must be monitored rather than felt. It activates pursuit. But here's the part no one says out loud. To maintain this dynamic, you have to become smaller, quieter, less expressive. You have to swallow needs before they reach your mouth. You have to tolerate emotional hunger without naming it. You have to pretend independence when what you actually want is connection. And slowly, without realizing it, the relationship stops being about closeness and becomes about control. They chase because they're dysregulated. You disappear because you're adapting. Self-adaptation is an empowerment. It's self-abandonment disguised as strength. Yes, withholding emotional availability can make an avoidant chase, but it also teaches you that being wanted requires being less human. And that's the cost no one prepares you for. Avoidants don't obsess over people. They obsess over unfinished stories. Avoidants aren't wired to sit in emotional clarity. Clarity requires presence, accountability, and sustained emotional contact, all things the nervous system learned to avoid early on. What they are wired for is incompletion. When something ends cleanly, there's relief. When something ends vaguely, the mind stays engaged. And engagement for an avoidant often masquerades as attachment. That's why unresolved endings work so well. Ambiguity keeps the door open without forcing entry. Instead of a final conversation, you let things trail off. Instead of naming how you feel, you soften it into suggestion. Instead of confirming where they stand with you, you let the question linger in the air. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just enough uncertainty to prevent emotional resolution. Their mind does the rest. Avoidants are thinkers when they can't be feelers. When emotions become too direct, they shut down. But when meaning is incomplete, they start looping, they replay conversations, they analyze tone, they revisit moments, looking for signals they might have missed. Not because they're suddenly emotionally available, but because uncertainty feels safer than vulnerability. It gives them something to manage. And this is where rumination is born. Their nervous system never learned how to sit inside emotional uncertainty without reaching for control. So instead of asking you directly, they try to solve you internally. They imagine what you meant. They wonder what you're doing now. They question whether the ending was actually an ending at all. The lack of clarity keeps the attachment thread alive long after the interaction ends. But this doesn't create intimacy. It creates cognitive looping. Looping feels like longing. It looks like missing you. It sounds like I can't stop thinking about you. But what they're attached to isn't you. It's the unresolved narrative. The story without an ending. The emotional equation that never balanced. And here's the quiet danger. To keep someone in this loop, you have to stay undefined. You can't ask for clarity without breaking the spell. You can't state needs without closing the loop. You have to remain slightly out of reach, emotionally unspecific, just blurred enough to invite interpretation. Over time, this teaches you to trade truth for tension. The connection becomes sustained, not by mutual presence, but by mental occupation. They chase not because they're moving toward intimacy, but because their mind won't let the story end. And unfinished stories may feel powerful, but they rarely feel safe. If you want an avoidant to chase, disappear after closeness. Intimacy is not neutral for an avoidant. It doesn't register as comfort. It registers as threat. Emotional closeness activates fear because it signals dependence, exposure, and loss of control. Distance, on the other hand, restores equilibrium. Space feels familiar. Detachment feels safe. So when intimacy is immediately followed by withdrawal, their nervous system experiences something it can't easily resolve. Here's why this works. During moments of vulnerability, deep conversations, emotional openness, shared closeness, attachment activates, whether they want it to or not. Their body responds before their defenses can intervene. But when you pull away right after that moment, you remove the safety that usually follows closeness. The nervous system is left suspended. Connection has begun, but regulation hasn't returned. That's the short circuit. They don't have time to detach cleanly. They don't get the emotional decompression they rely on. Instead, they're left holding activated attachment without the distance that usually shuts it down. And that internal imbalance is deeply uncomfortable. So they reach back out, not because they've processed their feelings, not because they're suddenly capable of intimacy, but because their system is dysregulated, and returning to you feels like the fastest way to restore balance. This is why the pursuit can feel intense and sudden. They may initiate contact, reopen conversations, or act more emotionally present than usual. From the outside, it looks like progress. From the inside, it's self-soothing. This tactic is effective because it leverages a push-pull dynamic their nervous system already recognizes. Closeness creates activation. Distance creates urgency. Together, they form a loop. The body learns to crave, but this is also where the danger lives. To maintain this dynamic, intimacy must always be followed by withdrawal. Vulnerability becomes a setup rather than a bridge. Connection is no longer something that deepens. It's something that destabilizes. Over time, the relationship stops being about safety and starts being about relief. Each reunion feels intense, charged, meaningful. Not because the bond is secure, but because the nervous system is cycling between activation and release. That cycle has a name: trauma bonding. The attachment grows stronger, not healthier. The pull intensifies, not because love is expanding, but because regulation is outsourced. Both people begin to associate closeness with anxiety and distance with desire. And the cost isn't just theirs. To play this role, you have to weaponize intimacy. You have to retreat when you feel close. You have to disappear when connection starts to feel real. You train yourself to leave at the exact moment you want to stay. Is pulling away after intimacy can make an avoidant chase. But it also turns connection into a trigger. And once intimacy becomes something that hurts, no one leaves unmarked. The moment you stop asking for reassurance, they start offering it. Avoidants are not repelled by connection. They're repelled by emotional demand. Demand feels like pressure. Pressure feels like expectation. And expectation triggers the instinct to pull away. So the people they're most drawn to are often the ones who appear unaffected by them, the ones who don't seem to need clarity, consistency, or reassurance to stay regulated. When you stop asking where this is going, the dynamic shifts. When you stop asking how they feel, the emotional responsibility subtly moves back onto them. When you stop asking what you mean to them, you remove the mirror they were avoiding looking into. Silence, in this case, doesn't create peace. It creates projection. Without questions, they fill in the blanks themselves. They assume confidence where there may be resignation. They read independence where there may be self-protection. They assign value because the absence of need feels rare and unfamiliar in their internal logic. Someone who doesn't ask must be secure. Someone who doesn't seek reassurance must not require it. And someone who doesn't require it must be safe. So they lean in. They volunteer reassurance they never offered before. They check in. They say things unprompted. Not because they've healed, but because emotional demand has been removed from the equation. The relationship suddenly feels lighter, easier, less threatening. But here's the truth. beneath the shift. This isn't security you're signaling, it's absence. You're not calm because you're grounded. You're quiet because you've stopped reaching. And avoidants interpret that quiet as strength because it mirrors their own emotional style. Detachment recognizes detachment. This is why the dynamic feels so deceptive. On the surface, it looks like progress. The avoidant is more present, more expressive, more reassuring. But what's actually happening is a reduction in emotional intimacy, not an increase in emotional capacity. You become safe by being less visible. Your needs don't disappear, they just go underground. You learn to self-soothe in silence. You learn not to ask for what you want. You learn that reassurance comes only when you don't request it. And slowly, the relationship trains you to equate love with emotional minimalism. That's not intimacy. That's avoidance mirroring avoidance. Two people staying connected by saying less, needing less, asking less, not because they're fulfilled, but because asking feels too risky. The bond survives not through mutual support, but through mutual withdrawal. Yes, never asking for reassurance can make an avoidant step forward, but the step is conditional. It only happens as long as you don't step toward them too. And any connection that collapses the moment you express need isn't secure, it's suspended. The worst fear for an avoidant isn't loss, it's being optional. Avoidants are not haunted by abandonment in the way people assume. Loss can be rationalized, distance can be explained. What destabilizes them is something quieter and more threatening, becoming non-essential, being reduced from central to optional, from significant to replaceable, because optionality removes control, and control is how avoidance survives. This is why this tactic works. You don't disappear, you don't block, you don't vanish into silence. You stay visible, but unavailable, present, but no longer orbiting them. They can still see you living, moving, engaging with the world. They just can't access you the way they used to. You live your life loudly, socially full, romantically open, independently grounded, and you do it without inviting them into it. There are no updates designed for reassurance, no bids for inclusion, no subtle asks to be noticed. Your life expands, and they're no longer at the center of it. That's when the shift happens. They feel themselves becoming non-essential. Avoidants are deeply sensitive to relevance, not because they crave closeness, but because relevance confirms control. When someone's life no longer adjusts around them, something internal destabilizes. They can't tell whether they still matter, and not knowing that is intolerable. So they chase, not toward intimacy, but toward significance. They reach out to reassert their place. They test the connection. They initiate contact, not to deepen closeness, but to confirm they still occupy space in your world. The pursuit isn't about union, it's about reassurance of importance. From the outside, it looks like desire. From the inside, it's regulation. And here's the part most people miss. To sustain this dynamic, you have to keep your life partially closed to them. You can't fully invite them in without restoring their centrality. You can't openly prioritize them without dissolving the tension that drives pursuit. You remain adjacent, never fully accessible. Over time, this teaches you a dangerous lesson, that being wanted requires being withheld. Your independence stops being authentic and starts being performative. Your full life becomes leverage. Your availability becomes a bargaining chip. And connection becomes something to be managed, not shared. Yes, being replaceable but not gone can make an avoidant chase. But what they're chasing isn't closeness, it's their position. And any bond built on the fear of irrelevance will always prioritize control over connection.
Your calm is more destabilizing than your tears ever were.
Avoidants are conditioned to manage emotions by creating distance, strong emotional reactions. Anger, sadness, pleading, give them something familiar to respond to or withdraw from. They know how to shut down in the face of intensity. What they don't know how to handle is emotional neutrality. Calm without explanation, presence without reaction. When you stop reacting emotionally, the dynamic shifts in a way they can't regulate. No hurt to dismiss, no anger to outweigh, no pleading to rationalize away. The usual feedback loop disappears. Before, your reactions confirmed significance. Your pain proved impact. Your emotional responses reassured them that they mattered, even if the connection felt strained. Now there's no emotional data to interpret, no signal to decode, just composure. And composure is unsettling. Silence becomes louder than conflict because conflict still offers engagement. Silence removes orientation. They don't know whether you're hurt, detached, or already gone. And not knowing forces internal attention. They can no longer manage the relationship by managing your emotions. Your calm creates a mirror without emotional reactivity to push against. Avoidants are left alone with their own internal state. That self-reflection, the thing avoidance is designed to prevent, becomes unavoidable. They begin to question their role, their impact, their absence, not because you confronted them, but because you didn't. This works because emotional reactions often function as safety nets. They keep the connection predictable. They tell the avoidant where they stand. When those nets are removed, uncertainty sets in, and uncertainty is destabilizing. So they lean in, they check in more, they test the connection. They look for signs that they still register emotionally, not because they're ready to show up, but because the absence of reaction feels like disappearance in progress. But here's the cost. No one names. To never react emotionally, you have to suppress your truth. You have to swallow hurt before it reaches the surface. You have to perform calm when something inside you is breaking. Over time, composure stops being strength and becomes armor. You learn that your feelings are dangerous to express. That emotional honesty threatens connection. That staying regulated matters more than being real. This is how emotional self-abandonment begins. Yes, emotional neutrality can destabilize and avoid it, but it also trains you to disconnect from your own experience. You become steady, composed, unbothered, and increasingly alone inside the relationship. Because a connection that only survives when you stop reacting isn't peaceful. It's emotionally vacant. Explanations comfort. Avoidance, absence confronts them. Avoidants are highly skilled at using explanations as emotional anesthesia. Conversations, clarifications, long emotional breakdowns, all of it gives them something to intellectualize, something to respond to without actually feeling. When you explain why you're leaving, you hand them relief. You give them closure they didn't earn and emotional processing they didn't have to do themselves. Leaving without explaining removes that protection. When you exit clean, there are no ultimatums to negotiate, no final speeches to analyze, no emotional debts to mentally repay later. There's no argument to reframe, no feelings to minimize, no narrative to rewrite in their favor. Just a clean absence where access used to be. And that's confronting. Because without explanation, they're left alone with awareness, not your interpretation of what happened, their own. They're forced to sit with the impact of their distance, their silence, their emotional unavailability. There's nothing to deflect onto you. No words to hide behind, no resolution to soften the loss. Awareness is the one thing avoidance can't defend against. Distance, they understand. Detachment, they're fluent in. But awareness requires presence. It requires noticing what's missing, noticing the silence, noticing the space where you used to be, and that noticing can't be outsourced or rationalized away. It has to be felt slowly, quietly, without distraction. This is the moment many people mistake for power. It looks powerful because it shifts the emotional weight. It looks controlled because there's no drama. It looks like leverage because the other person feels it more than you speak it. But it's not manipulation. And it's not strategy, it's finality. Leaving without explaining doesn't create chase, it creates reckoning. If they reach back out, it's not because you said the right thing. It's because the dynamic that protected them no longer exists. And whether they grow or retreat has nothing to do with you anymore. That's the part people miss. This isn't a move designed to get a reaction. It's the point where you stop managing their emotional comfort. You stop translating your pain into language they can tolerate. You stop negotiating your worth through explanation. You simply leave. And in doing so, you end the pattern, not by controlling them, but by removing yourself from the cycle entirely. Because the real shift doesn't happen in their awareness. That happens in yours. This isn't power over someone else. It's the moment you reclaim power over yourself. And once the dynamic ends, chasing becomes irrelevant. If manipulation works on them, it's because it matches their wound. There's a reason these tactics work, and it has nothing to do with chemistry, destiny, or being the exception. They work because they speak the native language of avoidance, emotional distance, inconsistency, withholding, silence. All of it feels familiar to a nervous system that learned early on that closeness was unreliable and self-containment was survival. These behaviors don't heal avoidant. They activate them. Activation can look like desire. It can look like pursuit. It can even look like emotional presence for brief moments. But what's being stimulated isn't capacity for intimacy. It's the wound itself, the part of them that learned to associate connection with uncertainty and safety with distance. So when you pull away, withhold, disappear, or stay undefined, you're not awakening love. You're recreating the emotional conditions that shaped their attachment in the first place. Their body recognizes the pattern, their mind engages, their system lights up. And activation is often mistaken for attachment, but attachment born from activation is unstable. It feeds on tension, not trust. It grows stronger in uncertainty, not safety. And it requires constant maintenance, the right amount of distance, the right amount of silence, the right amount of emotional absence just to stay alive. That maintenance comes at a cost. To be chosen in this dynamic, you have to become less of yourself. You have to be colder when you're warm, quieter when you want to speak, smaller when you need to take up space, less honest when honesty feels risky. You learn to filter your needs, manage your reactions, and ration your vulnerability, all to remain palatable. And that's not connection, that's adaptation. Anyone who has to contort themselves to be desired isn't being chosen, they're being tolerated under specific conditions. The moment you step outside those conditions, the attachment collapses. Because it wasn't built on mutual presence, it was built on emotional absence, aligning just right. This is the truth no one wants to admit. If manipulation keeps someone close, it's because closeness wasn't safe for them to begin with. You didn't unlock their heart. You matched their wound. And wounds don't create secure bonds. They create cycles. Cycles of pursuit and withdrawal, hope and disappointment, intensity and distance. And no matter how strong the chemistry feels, chemistry without safety eventually turns corrosive. The real danger isn't that these tactics work, it's that they work enough to keep you trying while slowly teaching you that love requires self-erasure. And love that asks you to disappear to stay connected was never love. The most unethical thing you can do is refuse to play. Here's the truth nobody likes to say. The ultimate power with an avoidant isn't in strategizing, withholding, or creating loops of chase. It's not in pulling away after intimacy, staying silent, or making yourself harder to reach. The real power move is refusing to play at all, refusing to bend yourself into the mold of what they unconsciously crave, refusing to participate in their emotional game. This isn't withdrawal, a strategy. It isn't silence used as leverage. It's something deeper. It's choosing authenticity over manipulation, connection over chemistry with dysfunction, and self-respect over temporary attachment. It's deciding that your emotional needs, boundaries, and presence are non-negotiable, even if that means they stop chasing, even if that means they leave. Avoidants chase when they feel loss. They pursue when there's an opportunity to regain what feels momentarily out of reach. But that chase is driven by dysregulation, not readiness. It is a response to absence, not a reflection of desire for true intimacy. They attach in a meaningful, sustainable way only when they feel safety. Safety comes from consistency, reliability, and mutual presence. Safety comes when they can be themselves without the pressure to mouth someone else's emotions or regulate someone else's reactions. And safety only comes from someone who doesn't abandon themselves to be desired. When you refuse to shrink, mute, or suppress your humanity to make them feel comfortable, you become immovable in a way they cannot manipulate. Your presence is no longer a puzzle they can solve, a prize they can earn through distance, or attention they can control. It is simply there, whole and uncompromised. This is the point that changes the dynamic completely. The real power isn't in making them chase. The real power is in taking yourself out of their manipulation cycle entirely. When you refuse to play, you strip away the tension they rely on. The push-pull loop collapses. the chase loses meaning, and whether they pursue or retreat becomes irrelevant, because you are no longer playing according to the rules they unconsciously set. The irony, of course, is that this kind of refusal often inspires the very thing all the manipulative tactics we're trying to produce. When someone has consistently experienced absence, withdrawal, and emotional games, the presence of a grounded, whole person, someone who does not compromise their integrity, is magnetic. They may chase, they may show attachment, and they may even open up. But this isn't manipulation. This is authentic attraction created by stability, self-possession, and refusal to shrink. And that's the lesson most people overlook. The power in avoidance isn't in forcing someone to pursue. It's in refusing to conform to dysfunction while still being fully present as yourself. That is the ultimate move, the most challenging and, paradoxically, the most effective. It's the power no strategy, no trick, no game can replicate. The power of simply choosing yourself first.